I've been asked to give a brief history of LE work in Pacific Union, but it's really the same as the history of the LE work in North America, really. And so that's what we'll mostly address and focus on. This is an older presentation that was actually not made by me. I adapted it, and there's a lot more that I could say. So this is the summary. Some students who have been to Souls know some of this. You might recognize a couple of these things. I'm looking at a few Souls students and graduates here. So 1880 is when the first literature ministries happened literature evangelism happened in our church. There's a whole history behind that too. You know, Gutenberg was the man of the hour. He was voted the most influential person of the last millennium out of 1,000 years. The most influential person in the whole world over a 1,000-year period was the guy who invented a way to print books. And of course, that gave impetus to the Reformation and helped break the grip of the Roman Church. Thank you. But we'll start fast forward to Seventh-day Adventist literature evangelism. In 1880, a Canadian named George King began our literature evangelism thrust. And there he is, Mr. George King. He's got the beard going, doesn't he? And he persuaded the Seventh-day Adventist leadership to make him a really nice book that he could sell for a lot. In fact, it sold for $2.50. In today's money, that's about $130 for one really nice book. And they were a little reluctant, and so they printed a certain number of them, and he blew through them. Bam! He sold them all. So they printed a whole lot more. And he was age 30. It's interesting. SDA LE work did not start with youth, but with a young adult. That's interesting. A young adult, age 30. So it was door-to-door subscriptions, and this is how it worked. I would come to you, and I would say, here's my book, and here are the reasons why you should buy it. Here are the benefits. And then he would agree. He said, okay, I'll buy your book. And you'd think that it would happen like this. He would give me money, and I would give him the book. But that's not the way it worked. The way it worked was he would sign an agreement. He would sign a contract saying, I'm committing to buying this book. And I would say, thank you very much. And I'd walk away, and I would have my sale as a literature evangelist, even though I received no money and he received no book. Then I would come back around and deliver. Maybe some of you may have done this system. I would deliver a few weeks later. I'd come around with my horse and carriage, and my carriage was loaded with actual product. And I would say, here's your book, and I would give him the book. He'd give me the money based on his good faith word. I mean, he said he was going to buy, so he bought. That's the way it worked. And those were called subscriptions. He would subscribe to buying a book. So it was based on the good faith word of the people. That's a key principle. The good faith word of the people back in the 1880s and early 1900s was powerful. It was big business back in those days. It is estimated, someone has estimated, that 75% of all books sold in America before 1900 were sold door to door. Books of any kind, Mark Twain's books, books of any kind. Door to door was the Amazon.com of the day. If you wanted a book, you would hope that somebody would come along and going door to door, and they'd sell you something. That's what you'd hope. There was no Amazon Prime, no Prime trucks, no 747s or cargo planes bringing you books. I have a friend whose grandfather worked in rural eastern North America, and he said that he sold to 100 people one summer. And they all signed that they would, and committed that they would buy. So he had 100 sales. When he came back around to deliver, he said all but one of them gave him money and he gave them product. All but one. Is that amazing? But that's the way it was back then. It's a different culture. It's a different world. It's different. J.H. Kellogg, some of you may know who he is. He's the man in the white suit, famous Seventh-day Adventist medical doctor. He wrote a book called Home Handbook of Domestic Hygiene and Rational Medicine. Back then they had long titles. And he recruited agents and trained them. And they sold hundreds of thousands of copies, door to door. Hundreds of thousands of copies. Eventually, literature evangelists bought their books not directly from the publisher, like George King did, but from what was called a state agent. A state agent. That would be a territorial leader, a literature evangelist leader. And that person was responsible to recruit literature evangelists, to support literature evangelists, to train literature evangelists, and to supply them with products. And that eventually turned into a local conference literature ministries director, like you're looking at in the back of the room, Mr. Nelson Ernst. He is the great-great-great-great-great-grandchild of this system that we're talking about. Now, just briefly, I want to watch my time here. Just briefly, in 1875, Seventh-day Adventists had done virtually nothing for overseas. Jan Andrews was sent to Europe in 1874. But Ellen White had a vision in Battle Creek, and she saw presses in different places. And earlier she had seen a vision with points of light going all around the world. And we opened up publishing houses, and literature evangelists opened the work in so many different countries, opened Seventh-day Adventist work in so many different countries. In fact, according to my research, these are the countries, I'm going to list them, these are the countries that Seventh-day Adventists wanted to enter but couldn't because they didn't have money to pay a missionary or to pay a pastor. And so they sent self-supporting literature evangelist missionaries into these countries. And the first Seventh-day Adventist presence in that country was because of literature evangelism. And those countries are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Burma, Caribbean islands, Chile, China, Colombia, Denmark, Ecuador, Egypt, England, Finland, France, Ghana, Haiti, Italy, Jamaica, Mexico, Norway, Paraguay, Philippines, Russia, Uruguay, Venezuela, Yugoslavia, and British Guyana. And British Guyana is one of my favorite stories where a Seventh-day Adventist comes up to a ship's captain and says to him, hey, can you take this bundle of tracts, they were Sabbath tracts, I think, tracts to British Guyana? Your ship is going there. And the guy's like, I don't care about God. I don't want to take your tracts. Go away. And the Adventist persisted and said, just take them, please, just take them on your ship. God will make something happen. He's like, okay. So he kind of was grumpy and he took them. And when he landed in British Guyana, the captain's like, why did I let this guy persuade me? This is dumb. So he takes the whole thing and he goes, whoosh, and throws it out on the dock. Some guy comes along, picks one up, he's like, what's this? It's a Sabbath tract. He reads it, he's convicted, he's converted, he becomes a Seventh-day Adventist, and the work starts in British Guyana. True story. True story. So literature, those are the countries that were entered through literature. Publishing houses sprung up all over the world, fulfilling Ellen White's vision that streams of light were going to go clear around the world. Clear around the world. In the 1930s, let's go back to our slides. In the 1930s, Arthur Maxwell wrote the bedtime stories, BTS's bedtime stories. They were very popular. I have them at home for my kids. The first one came out in 1920-something, and they were up to 20 volumes. How many here had a 20-volume set of bedtime stories? Anybody here? I had, when I was a kid, AJ had all 20 volumes. Those things are on sale at eBay for like $1,500 if they're in good condition. They're collector's items now. But I had volumes 1, 2, 3, and 19 and 20, I think. But I missed all the ones in the middle. Anyway, they were very popular. And I'm just going to read, let me go to the next one. After the bedtime stories, they asked him to write the Bible stories around the 1950s. And Arthur Maxwell was fantastic. This helped. See, what was happening here is that the economy was changing. Instead of around 50 to 75% of all books being bought from somebody door to door, that's changing. There are mail order catalogs now. There are a variety of different ways people obtain products. Of course, today, people obtain products in a variety of ways. Amazon is one. Walmart, Costco, whatever, eBay. But it was beginning to change. And so the literature evangelists needed some good products. And these were fantastic products in many ways. The Bible stories, I'm just going to read Publishing Ministry, page 98. Why should not the lessons which children and youth learn be pure, elevating, and ennobling? Cannot books be written that are free from every species of error? Is there not talent enough among Seventh-day Adventists to write books containing the simple lessons of the Old and New Testaments? Isn't that nice? That's what happened in the 1950s. Arthur Maxwell wrote some excellent stuff. I have the Blue Bible stories. My kids know their Bibles very well at a young age because of those Blue Bible stories. And there's another quote which I won't take time, Publishing Ministry 313, Ellen White encouraging books for children that are like that. Now, by the 1950s and 1960s, the economy had changed to such a degree that they needed to find a way to find more people who had interest to begin with, And they also had, of course, coming out of the Great Depression, they had larger price tags and people who wanted to buy on installments. And so the literature evangelism work moved more toward installments than paying in cash. In my example, in the old days, when he signed up and bought a book by subscription, and then he came and he gave me the whole thing at once. He didn't pay in installments. But after the Great Depression in the 40s and 50s, people liked paying on installments. And so the literature evangelism work moved toward installments. And they also moved in the 1970s toward maybe I don't have that in here. They moved toward lead cards as well. And that's how they could find more people who were interested more quickly, and sooner. And so with installments and lead cards led to a situation in the 1980s of debt. Now, let me explain how that happened briefly, and this will get us to today in short order. The literature evangelism work became centralized in each union. It was administered by unions. There are 9 unions in North America, and the union headquarters here is in Thousand Oaks. And in the basement of the union headquarters in Thousand Oaks was the literature evangelism company, so to speak. They called it HHES. That was an acronym for Home Health Education Service. And the HHES, the Colporteur company, was responsible to accept payments, right? When I got a payment from a sale, I would send it in as a literature evangelist. I would send it in to HHES, and then they would ship the books to him by U.S. Postal Service or UPS. So it was helpful. It was a centralized place. They also, the HHES, sent the literature evangelist a paycheck once a week for his commission. And so what happened starting back in the 1800s and early 1900s is that literature evangelism leaders, like the Conference Literature Ministries Director and the head of the HHES, the Colporteur Company, were subsidized by the local church conference, the local conference. So literature evangelists were not subsidized by the conference or by the union, but the leadership was and is. And that happened even during the time of Ellen White. So they would pay a guy to be the publishing ministries director, literature ministries director. He would recruit literature evangelists. He would train literature evangelists. He would support them, and he would supply them with product as well. And he would develop things and make it happen. And the HHES company then also, that leadership was subsidized by money from local conferences within that territory. And so that goes to pay leadership in the field and in the office, head leaders, mid-level leaders, etc. Some conferences at the peak gave nearly $1 million per year of subsidy to support the literature evangelism work. That's just raw subsidy. With that much support, it was very strong, as you can imagine. So eventually, in the 1970s and 80s, the installment plans that they used began to be problematic. And they began to be longer installments. Instead of paying 3 payments over 3 months, you would pay 12 payments over 12 months. And all you had to do was 20% down. Finally, they said, look, we want to make it as easy as possible for the customer and have the customer give 5% as a down payment and then pay 95% over 2 years at 18% interest. And that business plan created a deep problem. It created debt. In fact, it also created a situation where certain literature evangelists who were unscrupulous took advantage of that because the Colporteur Company would pay commission before the customer paid the full amount. Are you with me? So unscrupulous literature evangelists, this happened on multiple occasions in multiple parts of the country, would go to maybe a Native American reservation, and he would give a canvas, And he would say, these are fantastic, aren't they? He said, oh, yes, why don't you sign here on the dotted line and I'll pay your down payment for you. So the guy says, sure, sounds great. So he signed his name to the agreement. And then the literature evangelist would pay the 5% down payment or 20% down payment out of his own money. Then the literature evangelist would collect the 50% commission. See how that's dishonest? That began to happen on a repeated basis. And those things began to creep in to the work with a commercial mindset instead of a ministry mindset. I worked for a Pacific Press Publishing. I can tell you this story. It's more than 20 years old. I worked for Pacific Press Publishing, and I was talking with one of the vice presidents, and he said, look at this. And he pulls out a letter, and he said, this is from a literature evangelist who's forged my name to get into the country. So there was this dishonest culture happening in a lot of places. And church administrators found out about this, and they weren't very happy. And so they weren't as excited to give subsidy to help support the work. Does that make sense? And this was very widespread. Now, deep embedded in the system were deeply committed people who were working for Jesus. Not all literature evangelists were doing dishonest things, of course not. There were deeply dedicated people. So eventually, a lot of these colporteur companies, right, based at the union offices, began to incur large amounts of debt. They would pay literature evangelists before receiving the full amount of payment from the customer. And that created a situation where there is debt. And the HHES colporteur companies in the basements of the union offices began to collapse. This is a little map I hear of the Seventh Adventist Church in North America. And the first unions to collapse, I believe, were in the East. If I can get this thing to transition properly. What happened first, there were 3 unions that went together and said, hey, let's combine, let's have a merger. Let's have a merger so that we can save money. Just like airlines merge, right? This airline or this company, these companies merge. AT&T merged with Singular, and they saved money. And so they merged to save money. In the end, there was mismanagement of funds, and they crashed with a lot of debt and a lot of horrible PR. So the conferences and unions in this territory were not excited about giving subsidy to pay a literature ministries director of a conference or to pay a field leader. And so that's why when I first came to California, I would give presentations to conference leaders, and they would say, I don't know, I'm not very excited about this. Their experience had been negative. It had been debt and some dishonesty. Does that make sense? There's a lot of that negativity that's there. I remember when I was talking to one conference, I won't tell you which one, but I was speaking to the treasurer, and he said to me with great conviction, he says, we must be entering non-Adventist homes and sharing with them. He was very convicted that we should do it. He said, but my committee will not buy this. He said they voted 21-0 to not have any literature evangelism in their conference after all this bad stuff happened. Right? You understand? But the treasurer said to me, I said, can I make a presentation to your committee? He says, no. He says, let me do it. He says, I think I can get it done. And he did. And he did get it done. And so we at least had a youth magabook program in their conference that year. Praise God. But you see how that happened. So the North American Division also was not excited. We've had no North American Division Literature Ministries Director for over 20 years until very recently. Now, Elder Carl McRoy is the NAD LMD, and I'm very happy about that. But often I would go to these committee meetings, and they would tell stories about how they discovered things that were not done properly and things that were not above board. And so there's this feeling of distrust that administrators had. I remember I had one conference director, a conference leader, say, we just buried this old system. I'm not sure if we're ready to have a youth system yet, but I think we want it, but we're not quite ready. We're just getting over it. You see how they're feeling? That was 20 years ago. But when these other unions began to collapse, North Pacific HHES, Mid-America Union HHES, Canada, and then Southwest was next, and eventually Lake Union's HHES was the last one to collapse. Southern Union's HHES also has now collapsed, but it's being run through the Georgia-Cumberland Conference, and because Georgia-Cumberland Conference is an extremely supportive conference. They have a real vision for literature evangelism, and I'm thankful for that. But hence, these administrators, when we say, hey, we want to do a student Maglook program and it will help students get a Christian education, they like that. So they're willing to support that. And it costs, of course, way less subsidy to have a student literature ministries program. Hence, the proliferation of student programs all over North America in the last 25 years. Does this make sense? Yes. Does it help? It helps to understand what's happened. And that, my friends, basically, in a nutshell, is how we got to where we are today. And it's also how Souls West and a conference-based literature ministry program like we have in this conference, and we have in many other conferences, has gone really well. And we're excited about that. Administrators see that there's a mission focus and that there's not a potential for debt or dishonesty, or that those things are at least greatly reduced. So this is what I want to leave you with. I'd like to offer some thoughts that you may already have thought of, but these are, to me, compelling reasons to keep visiting homes as a literature evangelist, and why it will bless the mission of the kingdom of God for conferences to keep supporting literature work. Number one is personal contact. Personal contact. We cannot, there's no substitute for personal contact. There is no substitute for personal contact. Social media cannot give people any kind of depth of relationship. There's no substitute for personal contact. The interface with our community keeps the reason for our existence right in front of our faces as a church so that we don't get too self-focused. Number two is structure. LE work is one of the only ministries in the church where the person being contacted pays us to contact them. Does that make sense? Yeah. Let's think about this. So I go to the door, I make a missionary contact, and the guy pays me to contact him. That's good. That's very good. That's entrepreneurial. It doesn't take massive amounts of subsidy. Why did the Seventh-day Adventist Church enter in all those countries with literature evangelists? The reason is because the Adventist Church didn't have money. The fledgling church could barely support a handful of pastors financially. But literature evangelists is ministry that also has income. Ministry that also has income. Amen. So the structure of LE work is a powerful thought, a powerful force. And number three is prophecy. We're probably familiar with Colporteur Ministry, page 11. Until probation closes, there will be opportunity for the canvasser to work. We don't know exactly what she meant by that. She doesn't exactly explain it. She doesn't go into great detail. She doesn't, break down exactly what that's going to look like. In fact, Nelson and I have talked about this. What does that mean? Her next statement, the next sentence after that is kind of cryptic and even tantalizing. But we do know there will be some kind of canvassing, some literature work of some kind in the last days. But that's not what I want to say about prophecy. What I want to say is this. More than 1,000 will soon be converted in one day, most of whom will trace their first convictions to the reading of our publications. So notice that these people who are going to be converted are not converted directly by literature, our publications. They're not. Look at the quote. They're converted by maybe some guy, Tony goes up here, makes friends with the dude, connects with him, and the guy's like, I got to have this truth because of all the stuff that's happening in the last days, or whatever. But their first convictions were traced back because the guy got a book and read it. So the first convictions of these people, they read our publications, and now they're being faced with what's happening in front of them, and they say, oh, I think I need to do something about this. So their first convictions are traced back to the reading of our publications. The results of the circulation of this book, the GC, are not to be judged by what now appears. A much larger number who read it will not take their position until they see the very events taking place that are foretold in it. The fulfillment of some of the predictions will inspire faith that others also will come to pass. And when the earth is lightened with the glory of the Lord in the closing work, many souls will take their position on the commandments of God as a result of this agency. Isn't that interesting? So in other words, there's work that's done now, but you see the results later. Work that's done now, and you see the results later. And this argues strongly in favor of us to not say, hey, when I see the last events happening, then I'll get to work. That's not what this is talking about, right? So these are people whose first convictions were back then somewhere. Back here, when I first got a piece of literature or I read the GC before, right? By the way, quick commercial. Does anyone know someone who was converted by a great controversy, who's a public figure in the Adventist church?
Doug Batchelor.
Doug Batchelor? David Asherick. Somebody at a health food store handed him a great controversy.
Bradshaw.
John Bradshaw. It is written. There's one more. Best writer in the Adventist church.
Goldstein.
Clifford Goldstein. Somebody gave him a great controversy. These are people who are all just giving great controversies. Or, it's powerful. I just had to give that little commercial. That's part of the fulfillment of prophecy is these guys. So, please notice the clear usage, again, of the past tense. The first convictions of these folks are traced back to the reading of the publications. The great controversy will be read first, but accepted later. It's very important. This is why I believe our conferences should support literature ministries. And this is, anyway, I hope that this gives you a vision for the future, and it explains why we are where we are today.